Okay, welcome back. We're finally reached the last paper we're going to do. At least that's my plan for now. This will be 6 years of full papers. So February, March 2019, question paper 12. Okay, we're going to start at the bottom. Question 30. Skincares preventing sunburn made in the EU are more effective than those in the US. US tourists stock up on the creams, so US tourists are buying the creams when they go to Europe. And that's because they're not allowed to make them in the US. They're trying to change that, and they're trying to allow production in the US. How will this affect manufacturers of skin creams in the US and the EU? Well, that should be very straightforward. If they allow them to make them in the US, then the US manufacturers are obviously going to gain, because now they can't make them. But if they can, they may be able to just buy from the US instead, which means the manufacturers in the US will make more profit. Manufacturers in the EU are going to lose out, because they're going to lose out on those tourists coming to stock up on the skin cream products. 29. Balance of payments. So remember, balance of payments is made up of 4 sections. We're not given the secondary income here, so we just need to calculate balance of trade in goods first, which is exports minus imports. That gives us a negative figure of minus 70 million. Exports minus imports of services gives us a positive figure of plus 50 million. And minus 40 million from the net primary income, which will leave us in a budget deficit of minus 60 million. Remember, a minus figure is a deficit, a plus figure is a surplus. '27. A country imposes tariffs and quotas on imported goods. What will the citizens of that country experience? So very simply, what is a tariff? A tariff is a tax, and a quota is a limit that is placed on the number of imports. Okay. Now, if we put a tax on imports, what's going to happen? Supply curve is going to shift to the left because of the indirect tax. Price will go up. So therefore, the citizens of the country are going to experience higher prices. They're not going to experience higher unemployment, higher welfare, or wider consumer choice. They're going to have the opposite of all of them. They'll have less welfare. Well, welfare is relating to what the government gives them, so it's not going to affect that. Unemployment is not likely to be higher. It may even increase unemployment, because consumers will switch from having to pay the higher prices here on the imports to buying domestically, which may mean that the demand domestically will increase, so they'll need to employ more labour domestically. And it will result in lower consumer choice, because it restricts their ability to import, which means they've got less availability of choices. Okay, what happens when there is a depreciation of a currency? So I gave this in October, November, those paper videos for 2019. When we have a depreciation, the price of exports come down, and our total level of exports will go up, and our price of imports will go up, and our total level of imports will go down. Okay, so will it affect the level of national debt? No, it's nothing to do with the borrowing. The level of trade protection? No, that's government policy to protect domestic industries. But it will decrease the price of exports, and it won't decrease the price of imports. It will increase the price of imports, which we can see from over here if we understand what a depreciation does. Table shows the birth rate and the death rate for 4 countries for a year. If there is no migration, which country has the greatest rate of increase in population? Okay, so this is straightforward. All we have to do is you have to take the number of people that will be born away from the number of people that will die, and then that will tell us what the change in population will be. So for Botswana, that's going to be 23. For Brunei, it's going to be 24. It will be 16 for Indonesia. And it will be 14 for the country of Mauritius. So which one has the biggest change in population? That is going to be Brunei. Okay, just one sec. Okay, 25. A developing country, so a poor country, starts to show increases in economic growth. What is most likely to occur? Okay, so if they have an increase in economic growth, reduction in imports, no. The amount that they're importing will go up because as they get more income, which is our correct answer for D, because as they get richer, they obviously have to get an increase in average incomes. They will start to be able to afford more imports to increase their living standards from other countries. There will not be a reduction in the number of doctors per capita. There'll be an increase because as they have economic growth, their standard of education and healthcare should get better. So we should get more people wanting to become doctors. And an increase in absolute poverty, we would have a decrease in absolute poverty because people will be getting richer, not getting poorer. So poverty should decrease, not increase. Okay, an economy experienced deflation. So remember, deflation is where the price level goes down, and that means that goods and services become cheaper. What combination will show the likely outcome of this? Now, generally deflation happens for 2 reasons. It can be from AD going to the left, which we call our bad deflation because that will affect real GDP. Or it can also be because AS moves to the right, which we call our good deflation because real GDP will actually increase and it will increase our productive capability. But what is the likely outcome? The likely outcome we can say is that AD moves left, which means that confidence by consumers will decrease. Price level we know here is going to go down. And then investor confidence will go down. So we're only left with A. If we just know the first 2 and we don't even have an inclination about investor confidence, we can see decrease and decrease leaves us with only one option here anyway. Okay, but investors are not going to be confident if the price level of the country is dropping and if the real GDP of the country is dropping. 22. What is an example of someone who lost their job because of structural unemployment? So remember, structural unemployment is long term. Okay, and in IG economics there's 2 main types of structural unemployment that we study. And those 2 types are, if I put them in here, regional unemployment and technological unemployment. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking for. Regional unemployment is where there's a number of workers in a particular area that are concentrated in an industry. Let's say, for example, a coal mine, and then the coal mine, the demand for the coal mine starts to reduce, so all of the people in that area are at risk of losing their jobs. Whereas technological unemployment that is where technology comes to replace the workers. So Anisha lost her job as an engineer when her firm had to make redundancies in a recession. A recession is an indication of a lack of aggregate demand, which tells us that that is cyclical unemployment that is occurring. Jamie lost his job as an ice cream seller during the winter months, so that will be frictional unemployment, and in particular it will be seasonal unemployment, right? Which is short term, not long term. Sanjeev decided to stop working and claim benefits when the government increased voluntary unemployment benefits. That is voluntary unemployment. Okay, he is deciding to give up his job and claim benefits instead. But if Sanjeet lost their job as a bank worker when the bank replaced their job with a new computer system, well, that is going to be the technological unemployment. Which we know is a form of structural. What is included in HDI? Now, life expectancy at birth is included. I've gone through these questions a million times. They come up every year. This exact same question came up in October, November. Now, I can't remember which paper, but I think it was question paper 13. So you can go back and take a look at that video if you want. But like we said, the components of HDI, there's only a few. You just have to learn them and then you'll get all the questions right. Go to your Unit 5 slides and it will be included in that section. A country has the highest GDP per head in the world. So this is the highest output per person on average, right? So it's not the total output for the country, it's per person. What does this indicate? It has the world's biggest economy. It doesn't indicate that because it's per head. It's not the total amount, right? So for example, I think Luxembourg has the highest GDP per head in the world, but America or possibly China, I'm not sure which, would have the highest GDP in the world, so the highest total amount. World's fastest economic growth rate? No, it tells us nothing about their economic growth rate. It also gives us no clue about their population because it's just the output per person. But it does tell us they are likely to have the world's highest standard of living because they're producing the most amount of output per person, which means they'll have the highest income per person. Which policy would be most likely to reduce unemployment in the short run? So a short period of time. Okay. Removal of all restrictions on imports into the country. That is not likely to affect unemployment. In fact, that may increase unemployment as more imports come in and the demand domestically reduces. Grants to firms to research new technology. That is not going to be something that will affect the short run. We know that technology is affected by the long run, right? And so is a program of privatization. Privatization, first of all, may increase unemployment as we take it away from nationalized industries who are under government's control and we offer them to private industries. But it's also going to take a long time to take in effect anyway, so it still wouldn't be relevant for the question. Whereas if we reduce the standard rate of income tax, what we're doing is we are incentivizing. So this is an immediate effect. And immediately we are incentivizing people to go and work instead of claiming benefits because they can now receive more money for going to work and pay less tax. Question 18. A government lowers interest rates, so expansionary monetary policy. AD will go to the right. to encourage more borrowing and spending by households to increase economic growth. Why could this lead to a conflict with other government aims? Okay, so it could cause uncertainty and lead to lower demand. Not relevant, right? We know that AD is going to move to the right. It could encourage more savings and lead to higher unemployment. So AD goes to the right. We're going to have less savings because the interest rate has gone down. More borrowing plus less saving when the interest rates are reduced. It could lead to lower prices of consumer goods and result in deflation. Well, no, AD is going to move to the right, so it's definitely not going to result in deflation. It could stimulate consumer demand and lead to inflation. That's true. So when we move AD to the right, it's possible, depending on the level of spare capacity that we have in the economy, that we may actually increase inflation by doing so. So if we're at a point here on our AS curve where we've got no spare capacity, then increasing AD, like we can see here, may result in the price level increasing but the output not changing dramatically. Okay, so we can see a big increase in the price level, no real change in the output. And we call that demand pull inflation, when inflation is generated by increases in aggregate demand. So what is an example of an expansionary fiscal policy? So very simply, expansionary fiscal policy is two things. It is reducing taxes and increasing government spending or government expenditure. Okay? So therefore, it's nothing to do with decreasing a budget deficit. Higher interest rates is monetary policy. Increase in money supply is also monetary policy. But if we reduce the tax rates, that is an expansionary fiscal policy. Okay, 16. Which measure would a government take to reduce a current account deficit, right? So we know that a current account has a lot of different components, but like I said, when we get these questions, we're basically trying to figure out, or we simplify it in terms of exports and imports, right? Now, if we're trying to reduce a current account deficit, what we want to do is we want to make the level of our imports go down and or the level of our exports to go up. Okay, remember, a current account deficit indicates to us that we're importing more than we're exporting, which is why we're in a deficit. So to reduce the deficit, we'll need to fix it by increasing our exports and or decreasing our imports. Okay, so if we reduce domestic subsidies, that is going to make our exports go down, assuming that they're exporting as well as selling domestically on the market. Okay, reducing income tax, that's not going to have an effect, is it? Increasing VAT, that's just going to make prices more expensive on the domestic market. It's not going to affect our current account deficit. But if we increase tariffs, that will make our imports go down because of the higher price consumers will now have to pay for the imports. Remember, a tariff is a tax, and that will help to reduce the current account deficit. Okay, question 15 is very simple. A firm's average revenue is $10 and it sells 2,000 units. What is the firm's total revenue? So total revenue is very simply average revenue, average selling price, multiplied by the amount that we sell, which in this case is 2,000. And that should give us 20,000 in total revenue. Okay. So price will be $10, total revenue will be 20,000. Now 14 is also very straightforward. We're shown the costs of a firm, their variable costs and their total costs, and we're asked what is the value of their fixed cost. So the first thing to remember is, how do we get our fixed costs? It's our total cost minus our variable costs, right? And we know it's our fixed cost because it should remain the same no matter what the level of output is. So 80 minus 20 is 60. 110 minus 50 is 60. 140 minus 80 is 60. And 170 minus 110 is 60. So our fixed cost is clearly $60. When will a firm maximize its profits? Okay, so remember, profit maximization is when we're selling it for the lowest price that we can, and when we're selling it for the highest price we can and we're making it for the lowest price we can. So it's going to be when the difference between the total cost and the total revenue is the greatest, right? That means that when our selling price is really high and our total cost of making the product is really low, all of that area between the two, that will be our profit that we're making, right? It's nothing to do with how many they sell because it doesn't indicate how much it costs us to make it and how much we're selling it for. If average cost and average revenue is the same, well then we're not going to be making a profit. We're going to be breaking even. And then when it excludes a rival supplier from the market, that has nothing to do with our effect on being able to maximize our profits. It's all about our costs and our selling prices or our revenue. Question 12. This question has also come up in previous year's papers. So what type of business is always in the public sector? That is a public corporation. Okay. Now a monopoly, a multinational company and a public limited company, they are all part of the private sector. Okay. Now they can be in the public sector too, but it's unlikely, and they will not always, which is in the question, be in the public sector. Remember, a public limited company, that might be the one that you'll choose. That is a private company. They sell their shares freely on the stock exchange, so everyday people like me and you can buy them. An example of a public limited company is Apple or Nike. Okay, really large companies that are able to raise finance by selling shares. Table shows the weekly values of certain items for the average person in each group. Which group does the average person save the most? Okay, so remember, saving, which I'll label as S, is equal to our income minus our spending. Okay, so it doesn't matter if they're borrowing or not, right? To see how much they're saving is always income minus spending, whatever money is left over. So the employed workers will be saving 100. The retired people will be saving 10. School students will be saving -5. And then unemployed will be saving -100. So we can see the group that's going to save the most will be the employed workers, which is A. Question 10. Done this question through the Save My Exam ones for homework. So 3 people, most likely order of income from the lowest to the highest income. Okay? Remember, the person who has the lowest income is the person who's going to be spending the most on the necessities, which will be food, clothing and housing. So in this case that will be person Z. So we'll label them as 1 because we're putting it from lowest to highest, right? Let's see who spends the next highest amount. Well, that's person X, because they spend 30% of their income on necessities, and person Y only spends 25%, so they will be the third one. So we're looking for ZXY, which we can see here will be C. Okay, what is least likely to act as a store of value during a period of inflation? This also came up in our Save My Exams questions, and it's very simple. It is cash. Money is the least likely to act as a store of value because cash will lose its value during inflation. And why is that? Because inflation is an increase in the price of goods and services. And what do we use to pay for goods and services? We use cash. So the value of cash is decreasing. Because we don't use gold, property, or shares to exchange for goods and services, therefore they are not as affected by inflation as cash would be. Okay, they can be affected, but we don't use them every day, which means they retain more of their value, or they store more of their value than physical cash would. Question 9. What could discourage women? So what would make them not want to get a job? More education and training? Definitely not. That's a good thing, right? So they will want to get a job if there's more education and training. They will want to get a job if there is more flexible and part-time jobs that are available. If there's fewer promotion opportunities available, well, that will stop them from wanting to work. And if there's a shift in employment to the services sector, that's not going to have an effect. Okay, why would that make them not want to get a job? But if they got less opportunities to get promoted, that would be a factor that would influence them wanting to work. Question 7, we got a PES question. So we know first thing we have to do is our formula. We have to understand our formula, which is the percentage change in quantity supplied divided by the percentage change in price. Right? So let's calculate them. First of all, the price change, it's gone from 6 to 5. So the change is 1 over the original, which is 5, and that is a 20% increase in the price. The quantity demanded as we moved from 5 to 10, 5,000 is the change. Divided by the original, which is 10,000. That gives us a 50% change in the quantity that is supplied. And therefore, using our formula, 50 divided by 20 should give us 2.5. So the PES value is 2.5. 6. What is meant by equilibrium? So very similar again to October, November, and May and June 2019. Demand equals supply. That's what equilibrium means, right? So all the others don't apply. Very simple. You just understand the definition of equilibrium. Price at which demand and supply interact. Okay, question 5 is quite difficult. Haven't seen a question like this in any of the other papers. A lot of them repeat themselves. Sometimes they throw in the odd one like this though. So a private sector firm is given a contract by the government to supply a country's water. Now the thing we need to be aware of is water is a necessity for people, right? So we need to ensure that everybody will be able to get access to this water. Okay? Because it's a necessity, the government's job is to ensure they get access. So what's going to minimize the risk of failure that they won't get access? Now, if we ration water rather than meeting the demand, that is not going to be an efficient way of allocating it, is it? And it's not going to minimize the risk of market failure. It may just result in black markets for water developing as people are selling on their rationed proportions. If we insist the firm aims to maximize profits, so that is definitely not going to help us to minimize the risk of failure. It's going to increase the risk of failure, right? If we instruct the firm to provide water only to those who can pay for it, then we can't do that because we know that it's a necessity. So we need to make it ensure that it's available to everybody, right? So therefore, if we ensure that this firm's entire supply includes all the areas which are expensive to service, and therefore the areas that if they weren't incentivized to provide them in, that they may not, this is going to help everybody get access to this necessity, and therefore it's going to minimize the risk of failure. So if they didn't do this, the private firm, because they're only seeking to make a profit, they may not supply it to these areas. Question 4. What can be found in a market economy? So remember, a market economy is private firms, private control, right? So tax rates are controlled by the government, but we know there's no government control. Public corporations are controlled by the government, so there's no government control. And public goods are also issued by the government or provided by the government, but we also know there's no government control. So process of elimination, we're left with externalities, whether they be external benefits from merit goods or whether they be external costs from demerit goods, and we're left with monopolies in a market economy. Okay, 3, PPC. Now we can see that the PPC for goods has not moved here, but the PPC for services has shifted to the right. So that tells us that there has been an increase in the quantity and or the quality of resources for services, but not for goods, right? So resources have moved from the production of services to the production of goods. That's not true. If that was to happen, there would be a movement from services here, a point on the curve, to an increase in the production of goods, which might look something like this, right? So at this point we'd be producing less goods and more services at A, and as we move to B, we would start to produce more goods and less services. But that hasn't happened, we've had a shift. Number of workers unemployed in manufacturing has fallen. So like I said or showed you previously, unemployment is a movement from being inefficient, which would be inside the curve. If we have less unemployment, we start to employ the resources that we have available more efficiently. So we move from inside the curve to a point that is on the curve, right? But it's not a shift, which we've shown in this diagram. Producers of service have introduced better technology. Well, that's going to be our correct answer, because that will increase the quantity and or the quality of resources for services, but it won't affect goods. And the workers in the production of goods have become less efficient. That's not true. They have stayed at the same level of efficiency because they're still producing what they were producing in year 1. It hasn't been an inward shift in goods. They're still making the same. We've just got better at making services. A farmer reduces the land to grow wheat from 80 hectares to 60 hectares and increases the land for growing potatoes from 80 to 100. What is the opportunity cost? Okay, so remember, the opportunity cost is what they've given up, right? Now what they've given up, this should be very straightforward, is they've given up 20 hectares that they were previously using to grow wheat. Therefore, the opportunity cost is the output from 20 hectares that were used for growing wheat, nothing to do with the output from potatoes. That is a consequence of the decision that's made, not the opportunity cost. Okay, and question 1, this is a kind of a strange question as well, but it comes down to your understanding of developing and developed economies. So remember, developing means they're poor, and developed economy means that they are rich, right? Now, what type of agriculture would make best use of the resources? So in a developed economy, we're best use capital intensive methods because we have access to better levels of capital, right? Because we're rich in a developed country. In a poor country, we're more likely to use labor intensive as a best method of resource allocation because we don't have access to the better level of capital that they have in the rich country. So we need to, or it is best for us to rely on labor instead of capital in the poor countries. So therefore, what are we left with? We're left with C.